Okay, so I have a bone to pick with Sony. Let's talk about the brand new FX2. Let's get it. So as you guys know, the brand new FX2 has dropped, and it actually sports that 33 megapixel sensor that we see out of the Sony A7IV. Now, you guys have been seeing my A7IV image for pretty much forever, literally when it dropped. This is my A camera for all my YouTube videos. It does all my BTS, so I absolutely love this sensor. The image that comes out of it is absolutely pristine. It's clean, high dynamic range, really nice and crisp. But this is a very confusing camera, very, very confusing. They've brought it into the FX line. They've given it this tilting EVF. There's a few things that are just extremely questionable when it comes to being in the FX line. And it's just like, well, I don't get it. Okay, so we have to address the elephant in the room. Literally, it is like an elephant. It's the tilting EVF. I understand that a lot of people ask for this, but it was more so the loud minority that asked for it, and the majority do not need an EVF. The only time you physically need an EVF, you've got a shoulder-mounted camera and you're actually utilizing it like this, or it's on a tripod and you're looking down through the EVF like this. That is generally what camera operators do. When it comes to shooting at the hip, you're not going to be using your EVF, or any other situation, you're not going to be utilizing the EVF. It is extremely confusing that it is not actually removable. I understand if there are some people out there that want an EVF that you can actually attach and detach. This gives you so much more versatility than actually having it on here. The problem that I see with this EVF is that, look at the thickness of the body. So it pokes out so much on the back end. So if you're trying to fit this into a bag, you're going to have to take that into consideration, that this is going to get in the way, and potentially this could get wrecked after a while if you're constantly trying to jam it into a nice compact spot. It's really confusing what they've done with this EVF. Like, look, like I said, I can understand when it comes to cinematographers using EVFs with shoulder mounted rigs on the tripod like this. This is my professional EVF from Sony. It's on my F5, but because the way that the F5 is mounted, it would be mounted on my shoulder, and it's a massive eye cup. It feels extremely comfortable. It gives you another point of contact, and same thing, if you're on a tripod, you can literally tilt it up, look down, and it's great. You're going to see your framing and composition perfectly fine on a larger cinema camera, but on something this small, you're not going to be throwing this on a shoulder rig. You most likely not. Like 99.999% of people will not be putting this on a shoulder rig. There might be that 0.00001% that would be putting it onto a shoulder mount, and maybe they would actually utilize the EVF. And just not having the ability to actually remove this, it's just baffling. Okay, in addition to that EVF, it's a $3.68 million EVF, which is pretty much identical to the one that's in the A7IV, which is great. It's a brilliant EVF. It's nice and responsive. It's high resolution. It's fantastic. I'm not watching movies on it. It's perfectly fine. But one of the baffling things is that the A7IV has got a $1.04 million back screen, 3-inch back screen, and this has the exact same thing. The $1.04 million back screen. It's just a step backwards. Literally, the FX3's got a better screen, the FX30's got a better screen, and they've just gone backwards and given us a worse screen in 2025. That is also confusing. I can understand that there's probably a whole bunch of screens that they need to utilize from older cameras, and they just need to throw it in here to keep the price down. That's great. But the price is not down. That is what is confusing about this camera, is the price. You literally have other cameras out there that can do twice as much, 3 times as much in terms of specs and capabilities for the same price, if not less than this camera. It is just very confusing that Sony have priced this at the price it actually is for what it can actually offer in 2025. You may as well get the Sony A7IV. But look, I can completely understand if some people were having overheating issues with the A7IV, which I personally have not had overheating issues literally since the first day I got it. But this thing has a fan, which is obviously incredible. The great thing about this fan design that I love about actually this one over the FX30 and FX3 is that it's actually on the back here. So if you keep this closed, there's a vent at the top and a vent at the bottom that can still actually have airflow coming through here. And then you've got the vent on the side. So you're still going to get a little bit of air flowing through the camera if this is closed. But obviously your best bet is to flip the screen out because you're going to get such better performance when it comes to keeping this nice and cool. But now that it's got a fan with a whole bunch of fan controls, perfectly fine. You're not going to get overheating issues. Well, you shouldn't get overheating issues. Maybe extended long periods of a time, maybe. But the fan is a brilliant addition. Now look, one of the most confusing things happens to be the frame rates in this thing. Like the 4K in this is absolutely phenomenal. We do have to talk about rolling shutter because that's a bit of an issue with 4K, but it gives you that 4K 60 with a 1.5 times crop is what we saw in the Sony A7IV. Now, if we are comparing it to the competitors like the Nikon Z6 III, the Lumix S1II, even Sony's own, A1 sensor, FX3, A7S III, you have uncropped 4K 60. This still has a crop and it's within the cinema line, which just does not make sense to me why they are doing that in 2025. Like literally, give us an option where it's not a downsampled 4K 60, give us a pixel binned, give us a line skipped version where it's not as crisp, but it is full frame. We don't want to have to take that crop into consideration if we are doing some slow motion shooting in the FX2. Now, in addition to the frame rates, this also still doesn't have 4K at 120 frames per second. Perfectly fine. I understand that. We do have the FX30. We also have the FX3 and FX6, FX9, so on and so forth that has that 4K 120 frames per second. That's great. This has 1080p at 120 frames per second. Cool. That's fine. But it's 8-bit. It is a 4208-bit codec, which I don't understand. The A7IV sure had 8-bit 420, but if you went into the S&Q mode, that actually gave you 10-bit 422 with 1080p at 120 frames per second. Sure, it's slowed down in camera, but still, you get that 10-bit with the 1080p codec, whereas this 8-bit 420 with 1080p in an FX camera just does not make sense.
Okay, hang on. It does sound like I'm going in a little bit too harsh on this camera while I'm editing this, but we do have to revert back to the price and the price of the Sony A7IV. Like, it's almost an identical camera, but this price of the A7IV is significantly cheaper. It's like you almost may as well just get the A7IV and a lens and call it a day. But look, let's talk about the dynamic range is fantastic. Let's talk about the ISO performance because it's a little bit different than the A7IV. It's 804,000. We'll talk about a little bit of the noise performance, the low light, rolling shutter. Let's get into some of that stuff. So even though the FX2 is a 33 megapixel sensor, the noise performance is fantastic. Even at 12,800, you compare this against the FX30. Obviously, the FX30 doesn't perform as good, but if we put it up against the FX3/ZVE1 sensor, the 12 megapixel low light beast, it holds up incredibly well. I've always said this with the A7IV sensor, that it's super clean in low light situations, and it really is a great sensor when you're trying to do a lot of run and gun stuff throughout the full ISO range. But this ISO range performs the best at 804,000 with the FX2. Now, one of the biggest pros about this sensor, it has 15 plus stops of dynamic range. Now, when Cine D and Gerald Undone tested this dynamic range, it seemed to be one of the best, if not the best, in the Sony range when it came to this sensor and the dynamic range performance with that signal to noise ratios. So I'm definitely happy with this image quality and always have been with the Sony A7IV.
Okay, now we gotta talk about that rolling shutter, the infamous rolling shutter. The thing that a lot of people focus a little bit too much on, but for the price of this camera, and it's in the cinema line, rolling shutter could be a bit of an issue, and we need to talk about it. But look, overall, rolling shutter should not matter. There are some films recorded these days that still have rolling shutter issues, but nobody gives a flying shit. because it's all about the story at the end of the day. There are some very small use cases where rolling shutter could actually be a deterrent and could actually take you out of the story, which when it comes to cinematography, you don't want to take the audience out of the story. You kind of want to immerse them into the world of filmmaking and not even think about the cinematography itself. Sometimes rolling shutter could do that, but look, at the end of the day, it shouldn't really matter. Now, one of the things that I absolutely love that is coming in a firmware update with the FX30 and FX3 is this home button. Well, not the physical button itself, it's the Big 6 menu. So Lumix cameras actually have the Big 6 menu in there. My Sony F5 has the Big 6 menu because it obviously has it on the side of the camera itself. But this one, you literally press home and it gives you that Big 6 menu. So that's great if you do like utilizing that and having a top handle with an external monitor. It's perfect for those kind of shooters. Now look, contrary to the beliefs of some people when it comes to the audio options, yes, you can have the top handle, but no, it does not have internal 32-bit float audio. It only gives you 24-bit audio with 48 kilohertz. I mean, me saying only is, a bit of an understatement. It's still going to get really high quality audio directly in there with that top handle. You've got 2 XLR inputs and then you've got a 3.5 audio jack, but it's not 32-bit float audio. But you do have a ton of external options that are like Rode, like DJI, like Comica that I'm using right now that have 32-bit float internal into those microphones, which you could potentially use anyway. Now, obviously being a camera in 2025, this has that AI processor, which gives us a little bit more when it comes to these newer Sony cameras. Gives us better autofocus performance because it can focus on planes, trains, cars, and a whole bunch of other different things. But it also gives us image stabilizer, so it crops in on the image and sort of stabilizes the image when we're walking, but it also has that dynamic active stability that we see in the Sony ZV-E1, the A1 Mark II, the A9 Mark III, and a couple of other cameras, and that is a great feature when it comes to stability. Now, it does crop in quite significantly when it comes to that dynamic active stability, but because this is a higher resolution sensor, you're not going to lose that overall detail because you already have such a detailed image. So it definitely makes sense to have that on this kind of camera.
Now, looking at both of the tests of the dynamic active stability with the walking and inside the car, it does seem like there needs to be a firmware update. I do have to preface that this is pre-production firmware, and this absolutely has to be updated because the results are not great and are way better in the ZV-E1 that also has the dynamic active stability. So it's really hard to compare this test, but just assure that dynamic active stability is actually a really good feature. Now, that AI processor also gives you the auto framing settings as well, which pretty much crops in and makes it look like you've got a videographer filming you. It just follows you around the frame, 3 different shot sizes. You can see that in a couple of other videos, but it's a pretty cool feature to have in this camera.
Now, one thing that is confusing about this, it has a mechanical shutter as well. Obviously, which is great. It gives you 10 frames per second, exactly like the Sony A7IV gives you, and it does have that mechanical shutter, but it's meant to be in the cine line. Like, isn't this meant to be a video first camera? And this gives you up to 10 frames per second, which is baffling. Like, it's what the A7IV gives you, but I'm not complaining. That's a good thing. That is a really good thing. It's literally like a hybrid videography camera without fans. Now look, one interesting thing about the mounting points on this, it is different to the FX3 and FX30 because of that EVF. So we actually have a very small screw on that left hand side when it comes to the mounting points. Usually you have a 1/4-20 on the right hand side and 1/4-20 on the left hand side, and I think it's 3 1/4-20s at the top, whereas this one has 2 1/4-20s at the top, 1/4-20 on the right, and this sort of, I think it's the M8 screw mount on the side, which I imagine that would come with like a HDMI clamp, which I don't actually have in my kit because this is a sample, but potentially I would imagine there's a HDMI clamp that goes into the side, so obviously you can have a nice strong HDMI connection. But you actually have the microphone port and the headphone port actually outside the body, so there's no actual cover on this, but this is still meant to be dust and weather sealed to an extent, just like the FX3 and FX30, but I don't know how much to the extent because there is no cover on these. Now, also one baffling thing about the FX2 happens to be the memory cards. They've taken out one of the CF Express Type A. So this is pretty much identical to the A7IV, where it gives you that dual card slot, the CF Express Type A and SD card, and then just a single SD card slot. So this is what's in this one, which I don't understand why. Like the FX30 and the FX3 have dual CF Express Type A cards. And you would think that's a cinema line thing when it comes to this. And even my FX6 has a dual CF Express Type A card slot, whereas this doesn't. So it's further along in the line of 2025 and it has less than what the older cameras have, which I don't know. I don't know why. Now, obviously one feature that I absolutely love in the Sony A7IV happens to come down to live streaming and webcam usage through that USB-C. So you literally just plug and play straight into your computer. You can use this as a webcam, and that is fantastic. Whereas the FX3, you cannot do that. You can do it with the FX30, and obviously the FX2 now, which obviously is a great feature I absolutely love. Now, one thing a lot of people were asking, especially myself, happens to come down to the bottom here. We have two Q20 mounts on the bottom, so it's not going to swivel around if you're utilizing it on any kind of gimbal or any kind of tripod. You have two mounting options, which is a professional thing and absolutely amazing that they've added it in this camera. So look, overall, hopefully I'm not being too harsh on this camera. It's just so confusing. Nobody asked for this camera, but we got it. It's kind of almost like an A7V in a way, but in a cinema body. It's just a very confusing camera. It's great, don't get me wrong. It's a really good camera. If there weren't other cameras out there that have similar, if not better specs, then this would still be a great camera, but it's the price point that they're actually putting this at in comparison to the competitors, which makes it very confusing because it's quite significantly priced above the Sony FX30, and it's very close to the FX3. So it's just like, you may as well spend a little bit more, get the FX3. It's a fantastic camera, but this does have a few extra features the FX3 doesn't have. But you would imagine the FX3 Mark II, whenever that comes, would be a fantastic camera that would absolutely chomp this one. So if Sony could put this a little bit cheaper, then that's great. That would be quite amazing, and it would be quite worth it as an entry level into the cinema line. That's where I see this camera, is an entry level into the cinema line in the full frame space. We've got the FX30, which is a phenomenal camera for the price. For the price, that is the one thing that we're talking about here, is price. If you take price into consideration, this camera is so confusing. I just hope I haven't gone in too harsh on this camera because it's still great, but it has those cons. I don't know, Sony. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you guys in the next one. Let's get it.